My name is Rachel McNair, and I'd like to make the case to my fellow pro-lifers as to why ranking in voting would actually be quite helpful to us. I'm going to start with the problem of pluralities. You have a majority means that you have more than half, and a plurality means the person who got the most votes, and it could be less than half, it could be way less than half, if there are enough other candidates that divide up the other votes and didn't get as many. Let's take a real-life case of where this is a problem. 1978, Nancy Kassebaum was running for the United States Senate. This was her first time. As an incumbent, obviously, she got elected over and over again, but her very first time, she won the primary with 30.5% of the vote. In other words, not as much as a third. But that was more than any other candidate because there were a lot of candidates. And she won the election, and Kansas had a pro-abortion senator for years. There were plenty of good pro-life candidates. There were plenty of people that voted pro-life. But they got caught up in our current system where the plurality winner wins. So what you would have with ranking is that the pro-life voter can pick one good pro-life candidate first, and then another good pro-life candidate second, and another good pro-life candidate third. And if the first one doesn't make it, their vote moves to the second one. And if the second one doesn't make it, their vote moves to the third. Everybody still only gets one vote, but it moves with the preferences that you ranked. And that means that whoever won would have had a majority. And if the majority voted pro-life, you would have had a pro-lifer win instead of having pro-abortion Nancy Kassebaum. Then we have the case of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Now, you had Dan Kelly was pro-life, and Jennifer Darrow was pro-life, and Jan Protasewicz very definitely pro-abortion. In the initial primary, Dan Kelly and Jennifer Darrow split the vote, and the pro-abortion candidate had less, but there was a runoff. And Dan Kelly was higher than Jennifer Darrow, and so he ran off and he lost. They knew he was the weaker candidate. They tried to manipulate that to see to it that those were the top two, and that was a successful thing to do, and the pro-abortion person won, and there's another pro-abortion judge now on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. But if there had been ranking, then pro-lifers who had that as a concern in their voting could have voted for either Kelly or Darrow first, and then they could have voted for the other one second, and then if that made up a majority, one of the two of those would have won instead of the pro-abortion candidate. Now, it doesn't have to be a totally pro-abortion person that's the problem. You can also have a pro-lifer technically, but his or her heart isn't really in it, whereas other candidates really are solid on it. Or you could have a case of somebody whose heart may be kind of in it, but they're not very good at presenting the case to the public. Now, we have the case of Claire McCaskill in 2012. My fellow Missouri pro-lifers, it sticks in our craw, this whole case. She had a lock on the nomination because she was an incumbent, so she had her supporters go to the other primary and vote for her weakest challenger, did other things to promote her weakest challenger. The weakest candidate won with 39% of the vote, definitely less than half. So that shows that if Missouri voters had had the ability to say this electable candidate first and this electable candidate second and this one third, then the vote would no longer have been split up and allowing somebody with less than half the vote to win and go with Claire McCaskill. She won that election, and I think there's a good chance that if there had been ranking, then there would have been election defense to be able to have Republicans select the candidate that was actually the strongest candidate rather than somebody selected out by the opponent to be the weakest candidate. Now let's talk about the 2022 United States Senate races. There were hopes for having a majority pro-life Senate, but there were 3 races in which the pro-abortion person won because the pro-life candidate was actually quite weak. Here's what happened in the primaries in those races. In Arizona, the candidate won with 40.2%. In New Hampshire, with 37.1%. In Pennsylvania, with 31.2%. In other words, less than a third. So the party was putting forward somebody that was not selected to be their strongest candidate. There were people who voted for other pro-life candidates who didn't vote for these ones. So, they could be talked into doing it, but not these ones. The primary was designed to not select the best person because of how many people were running. And of course, that's a pretty arbitrary thing, how many other candidates decide to run. If you could have a situation where this pro-life candidate got a third of the first rankings, and then a quarter of the second rankings. Okay, that's now a majority. The majority of the party has supported this candidate. I mean, a quarter of them said, not my first choice, but still, okay, they have majority support. That means they're a stronger candidate, and furthermore, they can go into the election saying, hi, I have majority support from my party, which works a lot better than saying, I had a vote for me, I had a third of the vote in my own party. So that's where you have the strong candidate who's most likely to win in the general. If you have another candidate who gets a third of the votes for first ranking, but cannot attract second and third rankings, that should be ringing alarm bells that maybe this is a person that's not going to work very well for us in the general election. If we want to be sure of all our work to persuade people to be pro-life actually translates at the ballot box into having strong pro-life candidates, then we need to have rankings so that we have the best candidates and the best chance of winning. So this is a YouTube video, so lots of people watching may not be pro-life, or may be pro-life, but don't like that all the examples I gave involved Republicans, because after all, there are pro-lifers who are Democrats, Greens, Libertarians, and Independent. But the principle applies across the board. I mean, Democrats can also get their best, Greens and Libertarians can get their best candidates by virtue of having the majority of the support in their own party. I mean, it's the principle of the thing. Ranking doesn't magically help any group except one. It helps the group who are full of people sincere about a cause that they wish to persuade their fellow citizens to support them on. Because it means that you don't have all that persuasion work, which was so successful. You succeeded in persuading people, and all that goes down the drain because of the number of people who decided to run, or because there are people with money who know how to game the system. With ranking, you get much more of the will of the voters being translated at the ballot box. And once that happens, the people who are standing up for the vulnerable, who, are less inclined to have loads of money, are less inclined to think in terms of how to play games, people who are sincere and persuasive, we're the ones that benefit. For those of you in Missouri, there will be on the statewide ballot on November the 5th, 2024, Amendment 7. This proposes to actually ban voters from being able to decide that they'd like to use ranking in their locale or statewide. And for reasons that I've explained in this video, I urge all of you to vote no on Amendment 7.